Okay, good morning. So we're up to Shinyut Ches Sifov, working our way through Hilchos Bishul. Says the Mechaber in Sifov, Kli sheyesh by dover cham, a vessel which has something hot in it. Shayat seledes by, where it's so hot that the hand is retracts from it. It's yad seledes by. Muta lahanicha b'Shabbos al gabi kadeira hatzmuna. You're allowed to put it on Shabbos onto a pot which is mutman, which is insulated. Kadesha yishmar chumay v'lo yitztanein. That you can, it will retain the heat and it won't get cold. V'yochel tuach piv b'botzek, and you're allowed to sort of enclose it by putting dough on the mouth of this thing. If we've got dough which was kneaded yesterday, with a K, it was kneaded yesterday, it was created into the dough, and then you want to put it on the mouth to seal it up, to retain the heat, you're allowed to do that. But you can't put a sort of a cool pot on top of a hot pot, where the upper keli is going to become now yad saledesbay. So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Memtes. This is the Mechaber going according to his reasoning that we said previously in Sif Dalet. That if it cools down a little bit, therefore there's still shaykh bishul, and therefore here you've got this problem that if it's less than yad tzeledes, so putting it on something which is going to make it is hot enough that it will become yad tzeledes, then you've got a problem. But that which we said, according to the Ramah, that we're actually okay once it's been cooked, so long as it's not now cold, totally cold, we're okay with it. Therefore, we're not really worried about that. Seledes boy, afilu lenis bashal kol tzarchet. Amrin le'el b'sif dalet. T'yesh boy mishum bishul afilu berseach. Even if it's not fully cooked, and therefore you've got a problem that it could cook still further. Shani hacha de lo yavo alidei zeh alidei bishul gomor. Here is different because it's not going to get to bishul gomor. It's just that it's retaining the heat. But many argue that it's only allowed if this item that you're putting on to keep it warm is already fully cooked. Because our concern is that otherwise then it's going to be a bit of bishul, and that we won't allow. That if it's mevushal kol tzarcha, even if it's stomach v'yafalei, that's okay. So long as it's fully cooked, even if it will improve somewhat, we're not worried about it. Okay, lanicha hatzmuna. What does that mean? To put it in something which has been isolated, but begodim ibaydim with clothes. V'ashmuin and zemutel laniach hakli tachas begodim shekisu bohen hakadera. You've got to imagine you've got a pot and you've got a towel wrapped around it to retain the heat. Even though you mustn't do hatzmona on Shabbos, even with something which is not mosif hevel. So if you've got, you took the chulent off and it's on the side, you're not allowed to wrap it with towels to retain the heat. Here the hatzmona was before Shabbos. So for example, if you took the chulent off before Shabbos and you wrapped it in a towel and you turned off your hot plate or your blech or the fire or whatever, and you just wrapped it in the towel, that would be allowed because you're not covering it in something which is mosif hevel. That's okay. And therefore, if the towel came off this pot, you're allowed to put it back on to retain, to resume the retaining of the heat. Here, you're allowed to put this other pot in it, in the towel, to retain the heat. That's what it's talking about. Okay, piv b'botzek, and you cover the mouth of the pot with some dough to maintain the heat. You want to seal it with some dough. We're talking about dough which is not muktzah. For example, you need the dough. You need it for tarnagolim, for chickens in your house. I went to someone yesterday afternoon, and Taka, they have a chicken in their house. He's a Rav of a shul, and he has a little chicken, and very interesting. Interesting halachic shaylas how to deal with that on Yontif and other things. But it's not even you need the. Yeah, exactly. As I said to him, it was mamish that because there was on Shabbos. He told me this was an egg, and this chick had literally come through on Shabbos. So that was a beit station on Shabbos, not on Yontif. Okay, so you say he needs. So the botzek here is not mukta because you need it for the Tana Golim Sheva Beisay. V'ayim b'mogen Avram b'davka b'botzek shu ein bar meruach. And we're talking about a type of dough where you're allowed to put it onto the pot to seal it up, and it's not bar meruach. It's not sort of like moldable. Avol b'shayva v'zefes. But when you come to sort of wax and tar or tit and these sort of things, shodova mismareach, which you've got a problem of meruach, which is nav meloch on Shabbos, oshem mishum memarech. There, the problem is memarech. You can't do that on Shabbos. To also let in shayva b'nekev chabis, you're not allowed to put wax on the opening of a barrel, l'sosmoi, to seal it up. That is a problem of molding, of smoothing. The Taz says that still with botzek you've got a problem of meruach, and the reason why here it's allowed because here it's not proper meruach. You're just taking like a clump of dough and just putting it on the pot of the top of the pot to seal them and to maintain the heat. So you're not molding anything. You're not being memarech it properly. You're just literally just putting the clump of dough, which is soft, and you're just that way it's sticky, keeping the top of the lid on the pot. But there, the problem was you've got an opening of the barrel. Kopid Allah. You want to sort of seal it up very properly, very professionally, as it were. And therefore, in our situation, even with tit and with shayva, it would be allowed to seal this pot. But the Magen Avraham says no, you can't use shayva and tit. Okay. So then the Mechaber finished off and said, but you're not allowed to put a kli, which is not hot, on top of a kadera which is hot, where the upper one is going to be warmed, and to a point of Yatzaledis by from the lower pot. Says the Mishnah Berurah Nun Gimel, the Tavshashan is done because a pot that is cooled down, Kaimelon Besif Daled, the Yesh Bishlach HaBishel. We are of the opinion that if it's cooled down, we are concerned about Bishlach HaBishel. Valkein, also Afilu Lo Yitmina Klal, B'Shum Dova, even if there's no Hatmona going on, if it's just being put on top of a lower pot, which is hot, and it's going to now the upper pot is going to come to Yatzaledis, but you've got a problem. Now all of that is with a dovalach, with a liquid pot. The dover yavesh with a solid, afilun nistanin legamre. Even if it's cooled down fully, shari would be allowed. That we'll get to in sifches. Okay. Even if you don't plan to leave it there that long, nevertheless, you'll forget. Okay, so putting a pot on top of another pot, if it's a liquid, and the top pot is less than Yatzer Etzbo, and thereby will become Yatzer Etzbo, you've got a problem. But if the top pot is just dry, yovish food, which is cold, if it's cooked already, then we're okay about it. All right, Beseda. Zayin. Zayin. Yesh Mefarshim. That which we said before, that if you've got a hot pot, to put it on top of a kadera which is mutman, which is insulated, that it's even allowed if the lower pot is on the fire. That if it's on a pot which is on top of the fire, that's always going to be asa. So what's the machlekes? Says Mishnah Berurah Nun Hey. The reasoning is the kivin shakadera mafsekes ikeh keiratuva ve'inir. For example, you've got a pot which is on top of a blech or on top of a fire or something like that, and you want to put something on top of it, then it doesn't look like nir kamavashal because the pot is mafsekes, and therefore there's a very clear heka that I'm not putting it directly. It's not nir kamavashal. Again, we're talking about a kli which is mevushal kol tzorka aloish, but the second opinion says no, that you can't do it la'ilam also. Why? Svir lehu, says the Mishnah Berurah Nun Vav, dalidei kedera mafsekes have kira grufa. because you're putting it on a pot, but that's no different to a kira grufa, to an oven where the coals have been taken out. So you shouldn't initially put it on top of it. That we are makil, and therefore putting something on top of a pot, which is al ha'esh, that would actually be okay, because their pot is sort of mafsik and it's not near a kamavashal in any way, and that's not the normal way of cooking, by putting something on top of a pot. Okay, let's just do ches. Lo niach dova kar. So to put something cold, shenisbashel kol tzorkai, which has been fully cooked, al gabe meichem she'al ha'esh. So, putting something on top of a pot, which is al ha'esh, yesh oimrim shedina k'manichei k'neget hamadura, that it's got the same stringencies of putting it to k'neget hamadura. V'chol dover shemutzal anicha k'neget hamadura, v'makom she'yatzelez by k'goyin she'yovish, mutzal anicha al gabe meichem she'al gabe ha'esh. And therefore, just like you can put a dover yovish there, you can put it, you can put it here as well. And others say no, that it's like putting on top of an oven, and even if it's in special kol tzorcha, you can't do it. It's something virale, even if by putting it on, it will actually deteriorate. You're just doing it to maintain the heat. It's not allowed. The Rishon Nira Ikka, and I'm of the view, says the Mechaber, that the first opinion, which is more lenient, is the Ikka opinion. If, however, the tavsha we're talking about has liquid, and it will improve by leaving it on top of this keli, also the divrei hakol, then everyone agrees that it would be also. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. So we're talking about leaving something which is cold, which has been cooked but it's now cold, on top of a meicham on Shabbos, on top of some sort of pot or urn or something. Yesh oimrim kedina k'manicha derech hamadura, we said, and whatever you can put k'neget hamadura in a place where it's already yatzaredes by, then you could do that here as well. So says the Mishnah Berurah Nun Zayin, Sif Zeh v'Sif Zayin in Yinechotu. It's the same theme. Ve'elu hashtei deus shebesif zeh him atzman shebesif zayin. That these two opinions that we see in Sif Ches are really the same two opinions that we saw in Sif Zayin. And at the Shammai B'Davalach, it's just that in Sif Zayin we're talking about a liquid item, Vim Hoyim Itztanin Yesh B'Mishum Bishul, and the liquid item which is cooled down, if you put it on top of an upturned kli and it now gets the Yatzalelis, but you've got a problem with Bishul. Lokach Kosov Kli Sheyesh B'Davacham. That's how it expressed it. But here we're talking about a dry food, and therefore, even if it's cool, there's no problem with bishul. Imagine like a cold schnitzel; it's cooked and put on top of an urn or something in a kli. That would, according to the first opinion, would be no problem. V'chol davar shemutzal anichu nunches tahanu kol ma shenizbaya b'sif daled de'ein ba mishum bishul k'goyin b'yovish v'afilin instanin, like a cold dry piece of food, u'mutzal ishroisa b'kli rishon, you're allowed to put in a kli rishon, like we said in sif daled. So you can take, I don't know, a piece of cold chicken and put it into your hot pot of soup or something, because it's already been cooked and therefore you're not worried about further cooking. Hu adin, so too over here, the mutzal anichu neged hamadura rochek k'tas. You can put it a little bit away from the fire, but in a place where it will get warm. That's not a problem. This is going on. Yeah, this is still the opinion. This is the first half. This is the opinion which is matir. Even though previously we said that if it's gorof, that means all the coals have been taken out. Lo shari b'simin reishon gimon ela chazara. We only, if it's gorof, that's one of the 5 conditions of chazara. If you remember back from reishon gimel, and you're allowed to put it back. But to initially place it there, we never allowed that. How can you allow it? So how come over here? This is a nesina lechatchila. This is not just chazara. So how come you're allowed to do it? Tzarich lema, you got to explain. To svir lei ledeazu to have sokas hamechem afilu beina grufa odif mekira grufa. There we're talking about a kira which is grufa, and putting it on a kira looks like bishul, and therefore you need all the criteria, and you're allowed to return it, but you're not allowed to put it on there initially. However, here The husband Meres al Gaba Kira, because there the Kedera is on the Kira. Shel Mokum Shederech Levashel Tomid V'Nirka Mavashel. That's the normal place where you cook, and therefore it's Nirka Mavashel. Avol Bekan Shel Meres al Gaba Kedera, you're putting it on top of another Kedera. She'ein derech bishul b'kach, that's not the normal way of cooking it. Lokach shari afla niech lechatchila. And therefore, if you've got, let's say, a pot which is on top of a hot plate or on top of the blech or on top of something, to put something on top of it which is dry and cooked previously would be okay according to the first opinion. Okay, and then he says varishan nira, and according to the second opinion not. But the Mechaber concludes varishan nira ikka. Says the Mechaber and Sif, the Mishnah and Sif Katan Samach, v'chein pasuk el Rabbi v'Hagra, the koi gamal called the Sif Zayin, dinin echol to k'moshe kasavna lemalo. Okay, so therefore, taking something which is dry and pre-cooked and putting on top of a keli or something like that, we allow that no problem. And that's ma'asim b'chol Shabbos, that we do that. For example, you want to warm up some schnitzels and put it on an upturned keli on the hot plate or something like that. We allow that no problem. However, if it's roitev, then it's a different story. If there's liquid, then it's more problematic. Samachalef to give it yesh beroitev. With cold, we do say bishlach habishul. And therefore, putting cold liquid on top of a pot which is warm, even when it's not on top of the fire, would be a problem. And then we said, dafka if it's mistamik v'yofaloi, where it's going to improve. V'da, says the Mishnah Berurah Samach Beis, t'chol loshen hasiv zeh hu meloshen Rabbeinu Yerucham. The Mechaber is basically borrowing the expression of the Rabbeinu Yerucham. This is who he's quoting. V'ozel l'shitasin, the Rabbeinu Yerucham is going according to his opinion. Hanis k'le'el v'sifta l'bago v'dafka v'mitztamik v'yofaloi. When is it a problem? When it's mistamik v'yofaloi, when it's improving. Oz yesh bishlach habishol. Then we say there's the problem of bishlach habishol. Uladina kvar kosavnu le'el b'sif dalet haloch k'shapoiskim te'in mechalkim zeh. We don't make a difference if it's mistamik v'yofaloi or mistamik v'raloi. Even if it's going to deteriorate with liquid, we don't heat it up. Maybe the Mechaber, does follow what he said over there. And a delicious Rabbeinu Yerucham knocked Basel. It's just that he just carried on using the lashon of the Rabbeinu Yerucham, and therefore he used an example of a mistamik v'yofalei. But in essence, the Mechaber would actually say that even if his mistamik v'rala is deteriorating, it would still be asa. So in short, something which is pre-cooked and yovesh, we allow you to warm it up on top of a kli, even if it's alaish or something, because we're not worried. It's not near a kamavashal in any way. Masha'inkein, if it's roitev or liquid, which has been cooled, which is properly cooled down, then we have a problem with heating that up. Even though the liquid had been cooked previously, if it's chicken soup or liquid from gravy or something like that, still if it's cold, we will not allow you to heat it up again. Say that. Okay.